Alright, good evening. Welcome. I'd like to go over some articles and tell you what's happening in the news. And I'll give you my review and opinion about it. And later I'll ask you if you'd like to give your opinion about it after I finish the video. Before I start the article, I'd like to let you know that the purpose of this review is for information, educational, and review purposes. It's not to take the credit for the article. The credit for the article goes to the publisher, which in this case is Bloomberg, and the story by Lauren Rush. Now, with that said, let's continue with the article. The headline reads, U.S. takes first step towards regulating commercial human spaceflight. And as you can see, there's a picture here of Cape Canaveral, Florida. For any of you who are not familiar with the geography of the United States, Florida is a state in the southeastern part of the United States. Okay? Just to get the general idea of where that's located. Now, the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket with the Crew Dragon spacecraft is prepared for launch from Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center, May 21, 2023, in Cape Canaveral, Florida. Saudi Arabia's first astronaut class, Rayana Banawawi and Ali Al-Khani, along with former NASA astronaut Peggy Wilson and John Schaffner, will be flying to the International Space Station. And it says photo by Joe Rado, Getty Images. So you can take a look at it. Of course, you can tell that's not right up to it, but that's from a distance to get the proper view. Now, as per Bloomberg, U.S. aviation authorities plan to explore establishing standards for commercial human spaceflight, a potentially significant change for a rapidly maturing agency that has operated without formal regulation for occupant safety. The Federal Aviation Administration said Thursday that it's creating a rule-making committee to consider the process and costs of new safety regulations. It will gather recommendations from those in the consumer space industry and other stakeholders, with recommendations submitted to the FAA next summer. The announcement comes shortly before a years-long moratorium on regulating commercial human spaceflight is set to end in October. Since 2004, various pieces of legislation have been passed to extend the moratorium, which has restricted the FAA from imposing safety standards on vehicles that can carry humans to space. The FAA said in a statement it's launching the committee now, quote, due to increase in commercial space activities, unquote, as well as the impending of the regulation moratorium. You can see the video here, which you'll be able to watch all of it in its entirety after I enclose the link in the description, which I'll do after I finish this video. Okay. And of course, after it's all done. Under the current rules, people who participate in commercial flights to space do so under a framework known as the, quote, informed consent, unquote, meaning they must acknowledge that the vehicles they fly have not been certified for safety ahead of the trips into space. The moratorium was designed to avoid stifling innovation and growth in the industry. Well, I have a different take on it, and my take is that it's to cover themselves legally just in case something happens, either because it hasn't been sufficiently tested to where they know with close to 100% certainty what the outcome's going to be, and that's why I use the terms close to, not completely, or not 100%, because how can you tell what's going to happen when there's other variables you can't account for, such as environmental factors and other unknown factors at the time of the disclosure. Now, the FAA is responsible for licensing the launch and re-entry of space vehicles, but only to ensure that the activities don't harm the uninvolved public or property. Proponents for keeping the moratorium in place have argued that the commercial space industry is still in a learning period that regulations could be too burdensome. The Commercial Spaceflight Federation, which represents leading players in the industry, didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. The group lobbied for legislation that extended the moratorium in 2015. The FAA also said Thursday that it plans to work with spaceflight organizations to come up with new voluntary recommendations for keeping humans safe during trips in space. So I'm going to pose the question to you. What do you think of this article stating that U.S. takes first step towards regulating commercial human spaceflight? What are your views on it? Is this good or bad, and why? I do want to let you know, welcoming comments in the comments section, of course. Just keep it respectful, keep it without any derogatory language, and without any threatening language. The goal is for constructive dialogue. Do you understand? Okay. That being said, let's talk about the second article. Now, we have another article. Before I talk about the article, I'd like to reiterate the disclaimer that this review is for education, information, and review purposes. It's not to take credit for the article. The credit for the article itself goes to the publisher and the person who wrote it, if you want to use the wrote it, typed it, whatever. So, in this case, it goes to the Washington Examiner and a story by Anna Giratelli, if I pronounced that right. Alright, that out of the way, let's continue with the article. The headline reads, DEA opens fentanyl lab on the border and warns of Mexican drug cartels' global reach. And as you can see here, it looks like a spokesperson. And the caption says, DEA opens fentanyl lab on the border and warns of Mexican drug cartels' global reach. Alright. The Biden administration is stepping up its fight to curtail the burgeoning fentanyl epidemic that is sweeping the United States and expanding far beyond the U.S. borders. Drug Enforcement Administrator Ann Milgram informed the House lawmakers during an oversight hearing Thursday that the federal agency recently opened a lab in the border city of El Paso, Texas, called the Joint Intrepid Lab. Quote, it's a fentanyl profiling lab with the idea that we can immediately test fentanyl as quickly as we can as it gets seized at the border so we can determine who is responsible for making the fentanyl, what it's made up of, excuse me, and also have an early warning system for future drugs. Milgram testified before the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Federal Government Surveillance. The new facility will allow fentanyl that Customs and Border Protection's Office of Field Operations Officers seize from pedestrians and vehicles at the ports to be immediately taken over to the lab for inspection. Scientists can determine what precursor ingredients are used and connect the dots to which Chinese companies' chemicals are being used by which cartel and where excuse me, and where drug smugglers were moving the products into the United States. And here you can see a video that pretty much outlines it. It's a short video. After I publish this video, I will have a link to this article that will have the embedded video. So, Milgram said that the DEA has overhauled its approach to countering illicit drugs since the arrival of fentanyl over the past decade. Two Mexican transnational criminal organizations, the Jalisco Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel, are the main proprietors manufacturing fentanyl and pushing in the U.S. as well as dozens of other countries where they have presence. The DEA has expanded its global reach to match the cartel's expansion. The agency has launched three teams: one to track Jalisco, a second to track Sinaloa, and a third focuses solely on money laundering between the Mexican cartels and the Chinese. Well, they are mapping the cartels. They're analyzing those criminal networks that now exist in more than 40 countries. And they're developing targeting information of the members of those networks, whether or wherever they operate across the globe. Milgram said for DEA agents. The DEA targeted U.S. based drug cartel members recently and arrested more than 3,300 people who belonged to the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels between May 2022 and May 2023. Quote, these cartels are hiding fentanyl in fake pills that look like oxycodone, Xanax, Percocet, Adderall, and Milgram said. Quote, they're also mixing it with cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine to all induce Americans to take fentanyl without knowing it and to drive addiction. All right, I'm going to pose the question to you. What do you think of this article about DEA opens fentanyl lab on the border and warns of Mexican drug cartels' global reach? Please explain your opinion and more. Just to reiterate, that this is for constructive dialogue purposes. Okay, no threatening comments, derogatory comments. Keep this constructive. Okay, now let's move on to our third article. Before I do that, let me get some water here. All right, we have a different type of article here. Before I go into the article, as usual, I will say as a disclaimer that the purpose of this review is for review, education, and information purposes. The purpose is not to take credit for the article. The credit of the article goes to the publisher, which is the Associated Press, and the story by Matthew Bailey. I pronounce this. Now, with that out of the way, let's start the article. The headline reads, GOP measures would undo protections for endangered lesser prairie chicken and northern bats. And this is just something I'm adding to this as a commentary. Bats, just like almost every animal in the ecosystem, has a function. So every animal in the ecosystem hierarchy eats the next. And an animal that eats something that can carry diseases, as long as the person doesn't eat the animal that would have a disease, serves a useful function. In this case, the bat eats mosquitoes that can carry different types of diseases like dengue fever, malaria, etc. Okay. And then the prairie chicken, of course, has a predator that needs to eat as well, and they have a function for producing eggs. If I have that correct. If I'm not correct about that, please tell me in the comments, but make sure you tell me that in a polite way. Now, you can see the picture of Mr. Bat here. Okay. The caption reads, the updated photo provided by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources shows a northern long-eared bat, as per the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources via the AP file. So, just thought I'd throw that in, that they have a purpose, and the question is, what's going to be done with them? Now, let's get to the article. Congress has approved two measures to undo federal protections for the lesser prairie chicken and a northern long-eared bat, two endangered animals that have seen populations plummet over the years. In separate votes Thursday, the House gave final legislative approval to rescind protections for the lesser prairie chicken. It is, according to this article, a rare prairie bird once thought to number in the millions, but now hover around 30,000, officials said. And the long-eared bat, one of the 12 bat types decimated by a fungal disease called the white nose syndrome. I'm not familiar with that. Do a search. White nose syndrome. Yeah. White nose syndrome is a fungal disease that affects hibernating bats in North America. It is caused by a white fungus called the gymnococ, what is it? Pseudogymnococcus uh, destructans. I have that pronounced right. That grows in the muzzles of the wings of bats. The disease has killed millions of bats since 2007 and has spread to at least 37 states and 7 Canadian provinces. The disease threatens the survival of the insect-eating bats and the ecosystem of the services they provide. It's like I was saying, each animal has a purpose. You have major types, you have your scavengers, you have your vegetarians, you have your carnivores, but especially the ones that eat dead things or things that may have a disease is especially important because they prevent diseases from being spread to others. Okay, so in some countries like China, the bat is actually considered good luck. So anyway, I thought I'd let you know about this. I will send you the link later to this one here, or you could actually just search it. I have it in Microsoft Bing. White nose syndrome. Okay. Now let's continue with the article. Legislative actions backed mostly by Republicans represent rare congressional involvement in matters usually left to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service. The Endangered Species Act tasks the agency with deciding which animals and plants list as endangered or threatened and how to rebuild their populations. The lesser prairie chicken, which belongs to the grouse family, is found in parts of the Midwest and Southwest, including the country's most prolific oil and gas fields, the oil-rich Permian Basin in New Mexico and Texas. The bird's range also extends into parts of Colorado, Oklahoma, Kansas, but has diminished across about 90% of the historical range, officials said. A separate 220 to 209 vote would overturn protections for the northern long-eared bat, which has seen its population reduced by 97% or more in some areas because of the white nose syndrome. The bat is found in 37 eastern and north central states, plus Washington, D.C., and much of Canada. The House votes follow similar action in the Senate in May and send both plans to President Joe Biden, who has threatened to veto both resolutions. Overturning protections for the lesser prairie chicken would quote, would undermine America's proud wildlife conservation traditions, risk the extinction of a once abundant American bird, and create an uncertainty for landowners and industry who have been working for years to forge the durable, locally led conservation strategies for this rule supports, the White House said in a statement. In a separate statement, the White House said bats are, quote, critical to healthy, functioning ecosystems and contribute to at least $3 billion annually to the U.S. agricultural economy through pest control and pollination. Overturning protections quote, would risk extinction of a species. Environmentalists have long sought stronger federal protections for the prairie bird, which they consider severely at their risk due to oil and gas development, livestock grazing, and farming, along with roads and power lines. The crow-sized terrestrial birds are known for spring courtship rituals, including flamboyant dances by the males as they make a cacophony of clucking, cackling, and booming sounds. Well, white nose syndrome, meanwhile, has spread across about 80% of the northern bats range, caused a precipitous decline in bat populations. Critics of the endangered listing contend it would hamper logging and other land uses that aren't responsible for the bat's sharp decline. Representative Bruce Westerman, an Arkansas Republican who chairs the House Natural Resources Committee, called the Endangered Species Act an important but outdated part of U.S. history. He said, the unavoidable truth about the ESA is that a listing means less private investment, which harms conservation efforts. He said, in the case of the lesser prairie chicken, protected status, quote, is a tool for fish and wildlife to go implement the Biden administration's none of the above energy policy, unquote. Westerman said on the House floor, quote, it's another attack on low-cost energy for the taxpayers. It's an attack on jobs in America, and it's making us more dependent on hostile countries in the Middle East and South America, he said. Arizona Rep. Raul Grivlica, or Gridgeliva, I have that correct. The top Democrat for the Natural Resources panel said that the GOP measures, quote, give industry and not science the upper hand in making decisions about endangered species, unquote. He labeled Republican opposition to the Endangered Species Act, quote, a vendetta, unquote. He also said that 2 votes on Thursday were egregious since the GOP-controlled House has not taken action to address climate change, even as Arizona and other states suffer through, quote, one of the most brutal summers in the country's recorded history. Climate change, quote, isn't about some distant warning about melting ice caps in the far-off future. The climate crisis is here. It is now, Grijalva said, noting that Phoenix has a record with a 27-day streak of temperatures over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Quote, people are suffering, people are dying, and the GOP isn't doing anything about it, he said. The Republican majority, quote, has had 0 hearings on climate change, unquote, since taking over in January and has, quote, introduced 0 bills to seriously address climate change, unquote. Grijalva said. The House votes follow actions by Congress earlier this year to block a clean water rule imposed by the Environmental Protection Agency in a separate Labor Department measure that allows retirement plan managers to consider the effects of climate change in their investment plans. Biden vetoed both legislative measures. Okay. Now, I will pose the question to you. What do you think of this article about GOP measures would undo protections for endangered lesser prairie chicken in the northern bats? Is this bat innocent? Is it worth the effort to stop them from being wiped out by this disease? What do you think is the solution? Do you agree with their statements? Remember to keep the comments respectful, non-threatening, non-derogatory, and remember that we're aiming for constructive dialogue. Okay. Now, with that said, I've got one more article for you. Okay. Now, before I read the article, I do want to reiterate, and I say this for every single article, just to make it clear for every article. The purpose of the review of the article is for review, education, and information purposes. It is to communicate the news to people so everybody can know what's happening. Okay? The purpose is not to take credit for the publishing and its content. Credit goes to the publisher, which in this case is CNET, and the author, which is says story by Jackson Ryan. Okay, so these are the people, entity, and person who can take credit for the article. All I am is just communicating the contents of the article. Understand? I'm not the author. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get to the article. The headline reads, Google's Genesis AI tool could write the news. It should be stopped. So this is sort of an editorial piece in the sense that the author is giving their opinion and giving possibly some evidence for it. If you take a look at the photo, you can see that this is a presentation. And Sundar Pichai stands at the left of a giant screen that says, Making AI helpful for everyone. Now, at the end of the video, I will ask you your opinion on this article. Now, as Google CEO Sundar Pichai opened his tech giant's annual I/O developer conference in May, the phrase, quote, making AI helpful for everyone, unquote, was emblazoned on the crisp white screen behind him. Pichai noted that the idea was the most profound way to advance the company's mission of organizing the world's information. The world's information, for the most part, flows from the company's practically unstoppable search engine and its myriad apps and tools. As Pichai noted at I/O, 2 billion people are using 6 of Google's core apps. A good portion of the information and news is written and delivered by tens of thousands of journalists and writers and content creators, from globe spanning publications to small startups to freelancers, pinch hitting across magazines and news cadets honing their craft at local papers. Google believes it can help them by introducing AI in the mix, but AI isn't what journalists need, and the search giant's foray into the newsroom should concern readers too. Now, this is according to the author. This is not me saying so. As you can see from the article, and yes, I will include a link to the article in the description, as I will for all 4 of these. Now, it's developing a tool named Genesis that, quote, can take in information, details of current events, for example, and generate news content. Well, according to anonymous sources cited by the New York Times, it has approached organizations like the Times, the Washington Post, the News Corp, which owns the Wall Street Journal. It's unclear whether Google is pitching it to be used in news gathering or is looking to collaborate on development. Google did not respond to requests for comment for this article. A Google spokesperson told CNET on July 20 that, quote, these tools are not intended to and cannot replace the essential role journalists have in reporting, creating, and fact-checking their articles. But the very description of the tool by the Times suggests the opposite. Publishing executives who've seen Google's pitch for Genesis describes as, quote, unsettling according to the Times. The tools can reportedly automate those tasks, proving options for headlines or different writing styles, unquote, according to the spokesperson. And here you can see the actual video, and I will give you the link after I give you the link, which will be in the description of the video to this article. You'll be able to watch more of this video. Just over 7 months ago, I wrote that ChatGPT wouldn't be coming for journalism jobs, at least in the near future, because it simply can't do what a journalist does. OpenAI's flagship AI app is a word organizer, a truth collector, imaginative storyteller. It can't go out and report from a crime scene or interview a doctor, a school teacher, or anyone else. It also isn't trained on up to the minute data, though I was specifically discussing ChatGPT's abilities as a journalist. The argument could broadly be applied to large language models and generative AI at the end of 2022. Their deficiencies were too numerous and their hallucinations too common to present a real threat, I thought. That was then, now I'm not so sure. Not because I think ChatGPT, and this is of course again according to the author, not because I think ChatGPT, large language models, or generative AI has gained these capabilities and can adequately do a journalist's job. They can't, but this doesn't seem to matter. The tech giants have gone ahead and manufactured the tools anyway. They may not be designed to replace journalists, but what little information we have by their capabilities suggests it potentially could do just that. Watching Trinity. Because it's Maybe it's because I'm exhausted by the jamming AI sized pegs into a human sized holes, or just because I'm fresh out of watching Oppenheimer. It's definitely the latter. But the lasting consequences of developing a tool like Genesis feel like they're bigger than anything we've seen from generative AI so far, with resounding repercussions for the people who will be most affected by the misuse or abuse of that tool, you, the reader. The Oppenheimer analogy is dauntingly apt here. When scientists learned how to split the atom, it was immediately apparent to them that the reaction could help build a devastating atomic bomb. The first test of such weapon, Trinity, was conducted in New Mexico desert on July 16, 1945. The bomb detonated. It worked, and even a month later, two atomic bombs were dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I don't wish to diminish the horrors of the A bomb or equate the power of generative AI with those tragedies. I only want to highlight how quickly we can move from theory to practice with little understanding of the long term consequences. It's alarming. Genesis, as is currently understood, can't generate news. It takes one element of the journalistic endeavor, writing, and makes it appear as if it's the whole damn show, as the author stated. It isn't. It's just a disservice to journalists of all stripes to even suggest this, and should concern readers who understand that important stories are more than words placed in a sequence. Journalism is sourcing, verifying, fact checking, spending hours on phones and years in documents. The only reason we know about Genesis at all is because journalists, speaking to sources with knowledge of the service or of the secretive product, that is, were able to verify its existence. Yes, Google claims Genesis could aid a journalist, but the early description of the tool appears to see it function exactly like an aggregation tool. It can quickly piece together something resembling a news article. But if it can only remix previous reporting, would we not be better served by an AI that just presents those original reports to us? With all their sourcing, verifying, and fact checking already done? Isn't this just creating and exacerbating the same problems we already have as humans writing stories? This isn't a holier than thou tirade about journalists being the arbiters of truth up in our standing desk castles, infallible geniuses with knowledge of all things. We aren't and can't be. We're human, and there are already pages and pages of aggregation on the internet. Entire websites are built on it. Every small detail aggregated for content. For instance, practically every sentence Cillian Murphy has uttered during the press tour of the Oppenheimer has hit the internet in one way or the other. Sites take one piece of news, remix and rehash and republish it in a fight to the death for eyeballs in Google rankings. It results in a homogeneous slop of similar sounding stories flooding the web, TV, and social media. Twitter, X users will drop, quote, 5 key takeaways, unquote, ripped from someone else's tweet, and TikTok creators post videos they didn't produce of stories they didn't research without sourcing, excuse me, where that information came from or even checking if it's true. This slop is at least partially why the very idea of journalism has been blurred. We equate the slop with the substance because we see so much of the slop. Add a generative AI to the mix and we could ramp up the slop. More worryingly, we introduce risk, timelines matter, accuracy matters. Readers deserve both and both want readers deserve both and want both. AI might provide the former, but what about the latter? It feels like we're standing on the fringes of the Trinity test, watching the bomb go off and imagining it'll ever be used in a potentially catastrophic way. There's no stopping the rise of AI in newsrooms. Organizing, so Organizations are exploring how generative AI can be used judiciously and appropriately as one part of the toolkit, in conjunction with human writers and editors. After some hard first-hand experience, CNET has established parameters for when generative AI is a responsible tool for journalists to use, and when it isn't. You can read our full AI policy right here. There's a link you can look at your leisure. The sort of experience we had has been elsewhere too. At Gizmodo's IO9, a few weeks back, AI generated an error-ridden story about Star Wars films and TV shows. These experiences serve as warnings about the rush to develop AI as a provider of news. And remember, again, that we're referring to the author, not my commentary. Okay? It's not my opinion, but this is the author's opinion. Okay? Now, pushback against Genesis. Google says it's exploring AI-enabled tools, quote, in partnership, unquote, with publishers, which means there's time for publishers to push back. If demos are unsettling, as one anonymous executive told the Times, then perhaps we should prevent the use of Genesis. Fortunately, unlike Trinity tests, these AI experiments aren't being conducted in secret in a remote tract of the New Mexico desert. It isn't too late. The standards can be set now. AI shouldn't be used to generate news articles based on current events, and shouldn't be given the capability to do so. The only reason we know about Genesis at all because journalists, speaking to sources with knowledge of the secretive product, were able to verify its existence. They were able to prod Google and get the company on record, revealing the truth of its existence. They provided context by speaking with efforts that is, speaking with experts about the potential promise and pitfalls of such a tool. Eventually, they wrote something down. Human beings broke the Genesis story. Genesis could never. Alright, that concludes all of our articles for today's video. Before I finish, I'd like to ask you to weigh in on this article. What do you think of Google's Genesis AI tool? Could write the news, it should be stopped, according to the author Jackson Ryan and the publisher CNET. Do you agree with this statement? Why or why not? What else do you have to contribute to this article that's relevant? Please keep in mind that there are some ground rules, namely that there's no threatening language, no derogatory language as well, and to keep this respectful because we're aiming and we're always trying to maintain a constructive dialogue that adds value to what we're doing. All right, so that ends all of our discussion and review of the four articles. All right, I'd like to now thank you for watching the video. Please like, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. That way you'll be able to access all the videos. Also, if you haven't already, please click the bell button. That way you'll be notified of all my future videos. I will have a membership in the future that includes all of these articles in depth and other resources that you'd be able to learn things more in depth. Okay? That will be coming out soon. Also, I will be doing live streaming soon on YouTube, as I have these articles both on YouTube and I upload these articles both on YouTube and Rumble. Okay? So again, I would like to thank you for watching the video. I'd like to wish you a great day. Take care.